Trump committed the crimes. 6 words, spoken directly to Trump's own attorney, now America's acting attorney general, inside a United States Senate hearing room, on live television, with the cameras running and nowhere to hide. The silence that followed lasted 11 full seconds. Not a chair moved. Not a pen scratched. 11 seconds where the most powerful law enforcement official in the country sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his prepared answers suddenly useless. While a former U.S. prosecutor watched him from across the table like he had been waiting years to say exactly that. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't a provocation. It was a detonation. Deliberate, calculated, and aimed directly at a man who had sat at Donald Trump's defense table as the jury foreman read guilty 34 times. And now that same man was supposed to run the Department of Justice. Whitehouse made sure the Senate record reflected what that actually meant. But here's what nobody tells you about how this hearing began, because the room was already on fire before that moment. And what Whitehouse had built in the 90 minutes before he said those 6 words was far more dangerous than the words themselves. The Senate Judiciary Committee room was thick with tension before 9 a.m. Word had leaked that something unusual was happening. The Republican majority had done something Whitehouse described flatly as unprecedented. They had combined a full DOJ oversight hearing with Todd Blanche's acting Attorney General confirmation in the same session, same room, same cameras, same witnesses. Whitehouse stood at his microphone, his voice measured and cold, and called it what it was. "I don't believe we did that with Attorney General Garland," he said. "The record of the Department of Justice under Todd Blanche lends itself to very vigorous oversight. Oversight which we have been denied." That last word, denied, hit the room differently than anything Blanche's team had prepared for, because Whitehouse wasn't complaining. He was building a case. Blanche sat at the witness table with the practiced stillness of a man who had spent years in front of hostile rooms. Dark suit, American flag pin, hands flat on the table. He looked like every inch of the title he was about to officially hold. But Whitehouse had already been inside his defenses for 20 minutes by the time Blanche realized the hearing wasn't going the direction it was supposed to. The first strike came on secret internal legal memos, OLC opinions so poorly written, so legally indefensible that the Department of Justice had quietly withdrawn them the moment they became public. Whitehouse asked Blanche directly, would he allow that kind of institutionalized legal malpractice to continue? Blanche leaned forward carefully. "I do not think OLC opinions should be shoddy, full stop." Whitehouse's response didn't flinch. "It's a pretty good sign that they were shoddy when the department has to withdraw them as soon as they come to light." Blanche had no answer. Second strike. Whitehouse moved to the contacts policy, the decades-old firewall between the White House and the DOJ, limiting which officials on either side could communicate about ongoing cases. The policy existed for exactly one reason: to stop any sitting president from using the Justice Department as a personal legal weapon. Would Blanche maintain it? The answer was staggering. Blanche admitted he hadn't even discussed it yet with Attorney General Bondi. He saw no reason it wouldn't continue, and it wasn't the first time this pattern had appeared. Whitehouse had documented it. Acting U.S. attorneys installed without committee review, their first assistants immediately fired. Then, when the clock ran out, slipping back into the first assistant slot, creating a vacancy. The same move, repeated, over and over. Whitehouse called it what it was, an obvious scam designed to bypass this committee entirely. No reason. From the man who spent years as Trump's own defense attorney, now overseeing the department his former client has repeatedly accused of conducting a political war against him. But Whitehouse wasn't building to those strikes. He was building to something else entirely. And the room didn't see it coming. He pivoted, deliberately, almost casually, to what looked on the surface like an environmental policy question. Multiple section chiefs at the DOJ's Environment and Natural Resources Division had been abruptly yanked from their posts. Not reassigned to national security, not moved to fraud cases, sent to sanctuary cities' legal work. Environmental enforcement lawyers, specialists with decades of expertise in the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, had been pulled from their desks and dropped into entirely unrelated immigration litigation. Others had been placed on administrative leave without any explanation given. Whitehouse asked Blanche one simple question. Can you think of any reason why someone expert in environmental law adds value to a sanctuary city's legal effort? Blanche said he knew nothing about what had happened or why. Couldn't say whether the Clean Air Act figured into sanctuary cities law. Couldn't say about the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. He was not going to speculate, he said, about things he knew nothing about. 12 seconds of silence followed, the kind of silence where veteran Hill reporters stop typing and just watch. Then Whitehouse revealed what the question had actually been about. The fossil fuel industry, on the record, traceable, documented, had contributed approximately $100 million to Donald Trump's political campaign in the last election cycle. That was the number they could track. The dark money side, Whitehouse said flatly, could be 5 times that amount as far as we know. And then he said the sentence that turned every head in the room. There is no plausible legal reason to move environmental enforcement experts into immigration litigation. The domains don't overlap. The expertise doesn't transfer. It makes 0 sense as a strategic legal move. But it makes a great deal of sense, Whitehouse said, his voice dropping half a register. If the goal is to remove the lawyers who know how to pursue environmental crimes, he paused. Let it settle. The doors have been opened at the Department of Justice for big polluters to come through, because the cops who stand on that beat have all been moved away. Blanche's face stayed composed, but 2 chairs behind him, his aide pressed both palms flat on the table and did not lift them again. And the most explosive part of this hearing still hadn't happened. Because underneath everything Whitehouse had built in that room, something else had been smoldering since his opening statement: the Epstein files. The catastrophic mishandling of sensitive disclosures, leaked information, images of affected individuals, documents surfacing with names that powerful people had spent years and enormous resources keeping buried. Attorney General Bondi herself had pointed, at least partially, in Blanche's direction when asked about responsibility for that disaster. Whitehouse had said it plainly from the start. He did not think this committee should be complicit in covering up the cover-up. Those words, covering up the cover-up, had been hanging in the air like smoke from the first minute. And then there was the slush fund, a settlement arrangement with enough irregularities attached to it that multiple Republican colleagues had publicly expressed serious reservations, a tax amnesty structure that appeared to benefit Trump family entities directly. A Florida federal judge who had reopened the case and asked pointed questions about whether DOJ lawyers had committed what 36 retired federal judges, conservative, respected, appointed across administrations, had characterized in formal legal filings as fraud upon the court. 36 retired federal judges. Sit with that for a moment. The Florida judge had asked for a formal response from the Department of Justice. She had suggested the DOJ may have violated its own internal policies in reaching the settlement. She had raised the question of coordination between DOJ attorneys and Trump's private legal team. She had given the department a specific official invitation to rebut the allegations made against it. The Department of Justice did not respond. Not one word, not one sentence. Whitehouse stood in front of the committee and called it exactly what it looked like. First accusation of senior-level Department of Justice personnel of fraud upon the court, with an invitation to rebut the allegations, and they duck. His voice stayed level, but every word landed like something structural collapsing. That is going to continue. The 36 judges have their answer, and the court will go forward. For the first time in the hearing, Blanche looked like the defendant. I've never seen a Department of Justice as badly run as this one, Whitehouse continued, his voice building now with the controlled intensity of someone who had waited a long time to say this in the right room. I have never seen fraud upon the court allegations of this kind. I've never seen so many cases thrown out. I've never seen so many accusations that department arguments were false, pretextual, or designed to fool rather than inform the court. And we see that over and over again from judges appointed by every president. Then the sentence that silenced everyone. The Department of Justice and the United States government have lost their presumption of regularity in federal court proceedings. That wasn't a political attack, it was a professional assessment delivered by a former federal prosecutor, a former state attorney general, a sitting senator who had spent decades inside these institutions. And Blanche had no answer for it, because there was no answer for it. Then Whitehouse said he was about to say something he wasn't going to ask Blanche to respond to. He already knew what the response would be. And what came next is now permanently embedded in the official congressional record. The narrative that has developed around here is that the reason President Trump was prosecuted is because of a massive fraud and corruption effort in the FBI and the Department of Justice. He paused. 2 full seconds. That is not the only explanation. And it is certainly not, in my view, the most plausible one. He looked directly at Blanche. The other possibility, why Trump was charged with crimes, is because he committed crimes. And in fact, he has been convicted of committing crimes in every case that was allowed to go to judgment. The air left the room all at once. Reporters looked up from their phones. Republican staff behind the dais went rigid. Blanche's expression, built over decades of high-stakes litigation, broke just slightly around the jaw. "I do very much disagree with that, Senator," Blanche said, his voice controlled but carrying something new in it, something raw, something not in the briefing book. "As I expected, more as his lawyer," Whitehouse replied. "Not just as his lawyer," Blanche fired back. And there it was, the man who sat at Donald Trump's defense table as the verdict came down, 34 counts, 34 times guilty, was now telling the United States Senate that his belief in Trump's innocence wasn't just professional loyalty, it was personal conviction. That exchange lives in the permanent record of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The man who made that declaration now controls which federal investigations move forward and which ones disappear. He decides the department's priorities. He manages the prosecutors. He oversees the very institution that Whitehouse accused that morning of losing its credibility in courts across the country. The convictions Whitehouse referenced, still on the record, still legally in place, still there. And somewhere in a federal courtroom in Florida, a judge is still waiting for a response from the Department of Justice that never arrived. Here's the question that should be keeping you up at night, and we want to know what you actually think. If Todd Blanche genuinely believes, personally and not just professionally, that Donald Trump is innocent, can he run the Department of Justice without that belief shaping every single decision he makes? Or is America now being governed by an attorney general whose loyalty was already decided before he took the oath? Tell us in the comments, because the Senate record already tells us what he said when someone asked him directly.